Dear audience, so we have a fantastic panel today, and I'm really excited for all of us to discuss these issues. I would like to start with Professor Agnieszka Legucka. I'm kindly inviting you to come here. Our next wonderful speaker is Anastasiia Sergeeva. Please come on over. Can you please change the slide so that we can see all the speakers? Is it possible to change the slide? It's not possible. Okay, so our another speaker, unfortunately, is a bit late. It's Professor Marples, and so we have, last but not the least, Ambassador Vladzimir Astapenka from the National Anti-Crisis Management, yes. And can I have it in English? Yes, so I would like us perhaps to start. I would like just to check. Give me 1 second. What is happening? So let's do it in this way. Because I'm checking their other organizational issues, I would like to give the floor for our wonderful speakers to present themselves in the meantime. Ambassador, can you please start? You have the microphone there. And in the meantime, I'll check something else.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to see you here and take part in this very important discussion about what's ahead of us. And this is something which will be in the future.
Beautiful moderator, and I'm privileged to be accompanied by beautiful ladies on the podium. My name is Vladzimir Astapenka. I represent National Anti-Crisis Management, the team of experts in different fields, which was set up here in Warsaw almost 2 years ago following the falsified presidential elections in Belarus. And the main mission of the team is the transfer of power, which we expect to happen in the near future. We're working on that now in the near future. We're working on that now. You know, when you met this morning Pavel Laputska, who is the head of this organization, who became the deputy head of the United Transitional Cabinet, set up in August by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So we expect that with this consolidation, we'll have better chances and much brighter future. Thank you. Shall I pass the mic?
Hello to everybody. My name is Anastasiia Sergeeva. I'm Russian, and I'm chair of board of World Foundation, which is based in Poland, and since beginning of this year it is undesirable organization in Russia. Also, I'm a member of board of Association for Free Russia, Zavolna Rossiya, which is a community of Russians here in Poland standing for democracy future for Russia and standing for assisting and changes of situation inside Russia nowadays.
I have mine. Hello, my name is Agnieszka Legucka. I'm from Poland. I represent Polish Institute of International Affairs. I'm analyst there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Agnieszka, would you like to say a few words maybe about your biggest books so that we know whom we are speaking here to today?
Okay. I'm also a professor and academic. Lastly, just a few days ago I published, I edited, maybe not published, I edited a book about disinformation and propaganda, Russia and Belarus. I recommend it also. And I'm not a person who would like to advertise myself, so I don't know, you are looking something in your, maybe like to me follow up my personal experience. I was traveling to Russia a lot, or I don't know.
I was just checking because we're still waiting for Professor Marples, and I checked whether he landed. He did 20 minutes ago, so hopefully he will be with us soon. So as we're still waiting for our final speaker, I think that it will be perfect introduction to our panel to speak with our wonderful ones who are present today. And of course, I think that for all of us, the major piece of news, which recently happened, of course, is so-called partial mobilization in Russia. So I think that it is really important for us to speak what kind of impact it's going to have to both Russia, Eastern Europe, but also to Belarus and Belarusian democratic movement. And as we have the representatives of all these segments, I'm really asking you to think about questions, because we have absolutely fantastic specialist experts, and we'll have around 25-30 minutes to discuss your questions, your comments, your suggestions at the end of this session. So I would like to start with Professor Legucka and ask you about what do you think are the outcomes of, what will be the outcomes of mobilization announced by Putin for Russia. We already saw a lot of protests happening there. We know that there are now lines of people trying to leave Russia on land borders, but also those who are trying to get some flights to different places in the world. What do you think will be the impact overall in Russia, but also for Ukraine? Do you think there is anything Ukraine should get ready now for after this recent news?
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to back to last week that we met each other, actually, with Anastasiia and you. We were new to Poznań, and we were discussing that issue. And that time I said that Putin will not call the full mobilization, and we were discussing it because for that moment Russian authorities, and especially Vladimir Putin, had a deal with its own society about demobilization of its own society, that everything is under control, and his wars, international wars like Syria and so-called special operation in Ukraine is somewhere there, but the deal was that ordinary people are not involved in this conflict. But this agreement between the authorities and society has been broken just right now. And he did not call the full conscriptions, but the so-called part mobilization. Actually, it's not part mobilization. Actually, when you read this decree, it gives the Ministry of Russian Defense, it gives full control how many people they can call for the mobilization. There are no numbers in this document. But also we know, as an experts who follow Russian society, that if Russians usually say, maybe in Poland we do have the same, если это меня не касается, if it doesn't touch me, maybe it's not time to protest for me. So we see that there are some protests in big cities, but usually what Russians do since, I don't know, maybe centuries, but definitely since 2012, when the machine of repression started to develop or to be a mechanism of be involved in the system of Putin system, developed to maximum. They started to be a society which is adapting to the situation. So they are protesting by individual to a strategy to how to adapt to the situation. Not to protest openly, but how to adapt to the new environment. And they are adapting or protesting by foot, meaning that they are escaping from the country. So we see this. We can see it on the airports. We can see it on the borders. We will not see massive protests on the streets. We will not see massive protests against the party, or even maybe if Putin will call a full mobilization, that would be a big different picture.
I will keep it so that I don't have to take it from your hands all the time.
You can interrupt me.
Yes, so I remember, as you said, on Saturday we were discussing what is happening, and you were definitely saying that you were so much sure that Russia will not win. Would you say the same now, today, after you've seen how many people already have been mobilized and sent to different parts of closer to Ukrainian border? Do you think with this number, because I don't know, I will also ask Anastasiia about this question, that in this document released, there was a seventh article which was missing, and journalists discovered that the seventh article, which was set для внутреннего использования, so for internal usage, it was actually saying that they were really planning for 1 million conscripts, not 300,000. So do you think with this ambition of this many people being involved in the war, do you think that they still will not win? What would you say now?
I mean, I'm saying...
То, што я кажу, гэта, і ты можаш гэта убачыць у маіх інтэрв'ю, якія я давала розным журналістам. Я мяркую так, што для Пуціна Украіна будзе другім Афганістанам. Ён ідзе па тым самым шляху, па якім ішоў Савецкі Саюз. І гэта трагедыя для Расіі, і гэта трагедыя для Украіны, і гэта трагедыя для цалага рэгіёну. І таксама гэта трагедыя для Беларусі, таму што зараз мы бачым, што Пуцін он не мае паняць, не ведае, што ён тварыць, і таму мы таксама разумеем, што ён рызыкуе, і рызыкуе страшэнна. І калі мы параўноўваем сітуацыю, якая была ў прошлым тыгодню, і зараз мы видим, што яго сітуацыя пагоршана. Людзі і грамадства ў Расіі, яны былі згодныя з тым, што ён рабіў, але зараз яны не выйгрываюць. Украіна пачынае адваёўваць свае тэрыторыі, і гэта значыць, што ён не чуе сябе ўпэўненым. Ён хоча адыграць гэтыя тэрыторыі, ён хоча быць у Кіеве, Але гэта не атрымліваецца. Таму з маёй перспектывы, з таго, што я мяркую, ён будзе рабіць усё, каб Лукашенко браў удзел у гэтай вайне. І такая сітуацыя ёсць мажлівая. І я веру ў то, што гэта верагодна. І тое, што ў Беларусі можа быць частковая мабілізацыя, а можа быць нават поўная мабілізацыя. Дзякуй за гэтую адповедь. Шмат беларусаў не хочуць гэтага слухаць, але мы таксама атрымліваем шмат званкоў ад нашых сяброў, якія засталіся ў Беларусі, і гэта заўсёды тое самае пытанне, што рабіць, ці будзе мабілізацыя. Што ты мяркуеш, Анастасія, аб тым, з нагоды таго, што пратэсты ў Расіі іх не было шмат, і не шмат людзей выйшла. Што ты мяркуеш, ці будзе больш пратэстаў? Ці расійская дэмакратычная апазіцыя можа зрабіць штось, што магло бы дапамочь таму? Я пачну з канца. Перш за ўсё, мы бачым, што дэмабілізацыя расіян была ўжо такім тэмай для ўсіх экспертаў. Бо мы бачылі, што Путін і Кремль стараліся змабілізаваць добравольна шмат людзей. І гэта распольванне варожасці да ўкраінцаў, гэта таксама было паўсюль. Але, на жаль, мы бачым, што яны не змаглі змабілізаваць людзей фізічна. Людзі падзяляюць іх ідэі, і мы бачым у даследаваннях, што расіяне падтрымліваюць, але падтрымліваюць часткова, і гэта падтрымка нестабільная. Гэта больш аб нейкіх страхах, і чым аб тым, што яны павінны штось зрабіць для таго, каб гэта падтрымаць.
Real ideas, and you can see recently there was a publication of the research, of first qualitative research. I believe there are more of them. I know there are more of them, but this was the first which was published, of 250 interviews, deep interviews of Russians from different segments, different regions, where it is seen that it's not so definite everything, and there is no definite support. There was no definite support of Putin's actions, even in spring of this year, when the polls told about 80% of support. And this means that people are not ready to protest. As Agnieszka has told, they prefer to solve their personal situations in these conditions, but not protesting and do some active actions. And it's very obvious, and they told openly even in spring that what is the reason for, not reason, whether we could change anything if we go outside to protest. We would be detained, we would be jailed, we would be tortured in these jails, because we saw about tortures in jails. But we will not change the situation, we will not stop the war. So for us there is no way, no reason, no opportunity to do anything in this situation. We have no control on the situation. And we saw also that there were no consolidation, no political leadership, no new political leadership during these years, and it was also obvious because old political actors were not able to present any new idea, and new political activists which maybe had some ideas or tried to do something, they were not so well known to go and to come to the audience. So they preferred to work slowly in their communities, in their
Як гэта будзе працаваць у перспектыве? Таму мы бачым, што ёсць
Ukrainians to help even in not only in humanitarian aid for Ukraine, but also in some military equipment for Ukraine to consolidate the support for Ukrainians who are inside Russia and do such civic activism instead of political calls and political ideas. So we also saw that we have the deficit in Russia, great deficit in alternative political idea, in alternative political project, and nobody could present it, this project, and also nobody could articulate their idea, because everybody understands that we have no representation, we have no decentralization, we have no opportunity to change our lives, our country from inside or from outside, but there is no any political message which could combine all these ideas and be easy enough for people to support and to believe in it. So this is a point why Russians prefer to be passive and have to be passive in this situation. Also about the protest, we saw some protests of first of all youth, young people who are more brave, really brave in this situation. We saw also the brutality of the police, which is coming higher and higher, and this time we saw at the streets of Moscow girls who were even beaten up to the потеря сознания,
loss of consciousness.
Yes, and it was the first time in this in such rallies. Yes, also at the same time we see the protests of completely different style, and now we see it in northern Caucasian regions. And we even saw the effectiveness of this protest, because yesterday we saw that first of all mothers, sisters, wives in numbers of Caucasian republics went out. They go to conscription offices, they went to the streets, they conducted rallies, their husbands and fathers and sons even prepared some statements about the situation, and we see the results today. Ramzan Kadyrov announced that there will be no mobilization in Chechnya. He really was feared of these protest moods, even under such a control system in Chechnya, and this shows, and I saw the posts of different activists and leaders in other parts of Russia who told, oh, see, it works. We can appeal to regional authorities in this situation and it could work. So I believe maybe this is a good call, good hope for us in this point.
But you know that current time was informing already in the morning today that there were conscripts in Chechnya. So despite Ramzan Kadyrov saying this, there are pieces of information confirming that this didn't work. People were still mobilized in Chechnya as well.
Yes, there are contractors, and we knew about the contractors from Chechnya, but again, he also has his fear and his dependence. It is obvious. Of course, they try to show, first of all, in public one point and in reality the others. To have 300,000 warriors in the Ukraine, they need 1 million conscripts. Of course, it's obvious, so that's why they put it into the secret, and they would not be open the real numbers. That would try not to do this. They would try to cover everything. We even yesterday discussed with IT specialists the situation, and we believe now Kremlin has more necessity to close and to shut down internet communication, specifically messengers, specifically chats, because of course all these processes are discussed first of all not publicly but in groups and chats of Telegram, WhatsApp and so on. And of course by now more people rather think they could escape personally, or they think that maybe they could survive somehow. But I believe the situation would change greatly in a couple of months, when the first people would be die, when the first families would see how huge this catastrophe now.
Okay, but do you think that Russian democratic opposition can somehow use this situation at this point?
You know, we do not have a real Russian democratic opposition, because Putin did all his best to destroy it. We have some politicians of old generation, and we saw their position in Vilnius in August. They told openly that you Western countries, you Ukrainians, I don't know whoever else, should defeat Putin, and then we come to Russia and democracy would be immediately appeared in the country. So I don't think we should believe and should further think that somebody instead of us do something. But I can say that in civil society there are some moods and discussions and thoughts and plans how to change the situation. I will not be announced it now, but I hope we'll see changes in this part soon.
It is interesting because in the morning I also heard the interview with Legucka, who is in Brussels now, and he was implying that it is absolutely not wise for European countries not to let Russians who want to escape mobilization now to leave, because this is how actually these people can get ready here in the European countries and then go back to Russia and, you know, change the regime. What do you think about this ban on people entering the countries?
Dmitry was the person, one of the main persons who told in Vilnius that he would wait until. However, I can agree with him, and I agree with him. Also, I yesterday told the same at Facebook, and it was massive discussion in comments. First of all, yes, I see that people who, again, if the person request for asylum, for international protection, because he don't want to be a part of this criminal war and he don't want to be a war criminal in Ukraine, it is his right, first of all, to ask, and there is no opportunity for any politician, for European politician, to tell that we do not accept any refugees or any asylum seekers who want to escape mobilization. That's not right. It's not according to human rights principles. Second, I believe that it's better exit for these people than to go to Ukraine and they try to come to Ukrainian side and ask for protection, and it's more. It's economically better way. So it's from different positions, it's better to accept them here. I understand that it's a great challenge for European bureaucracy now. It's a great challenge also for the neighbor countries, specifically for Baltic states, who should decide whether they really think they are part of Europe or they just prefer not to be involved in any Russian problems. And I understand that it's really a crisis situation which needed to be discussed not only by politicians or bureaucrats but also by human rights activists. I hope that would be a subject of discussion next week here in Warsaw at OSCE meeting here.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. So, Ambassador, in the light of all this news, and we already know that now that many Russians already started to enter Belarusian territory, and they will most probably be trying to escape mobilization there. We don't know what's going to happen next in terms of the Belarusian government, right? There have been so many discussions in the start of the war whether the Belarusian army officially will start to be involved in the conflict or not. What do you think is going to happen now? What are the chances Belarusian army will become more engaged? And is there any way, what are the plans of Belarusian democratic opposition, who are mostly abroad now, to protect Belarusians from being involved into this terrible war?
Well, thank you. Maybe I will start with your last question. And I believe that, following the subject of protests and usefulness or not usefulness of those protests, I recall the end of February and the day of referendum in Belarus, referendum under basically missiles and military aircrafts already flying in the sky. And Belarusian opposition at that moment, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Pavel Laputska, took a very strong message to the society of Belarus, put a very, I would say, right estimate of the first actions of the regime to involve Belarus in this war, because now we know better that the regime was really acting on the side of Putin. Although at the very first days, as you may remember, Lukashenko was saying, I read in the newspapers that the rockets are flying. I shall check it with my generals, what is happening. I'm not quite sure. That later he confirmed from where the assault on Belarus
Откуда готовилось нападение знаменитое? Like a very famous
I'm trying
one.
to translate it, yes, to the English, from where the assault on Belarus was being prepared. And that was quite an emotional moment for us. We were shocked, generally, everybody at that moment in Vilnius, following this referendum. And we basically appealed to the people to go on the streets and to manifest against the involvement of Belarus in this war and against the use of the Belarusian troops in this war. And now, well, we may say it worked. Because in one day, in Belarus, 9 million Belarus, more than 1,000 persons were arrested and were brought to the administrative or criminal responsibility. But finally, at that very first days of the conflict, of the aggression, the Belarusian troops were not moved into Ukraine. And I believe that that was a very right and correct move to do. On behalf of the Belarusian opposition. We saved that, basically, because, well, we may guess that with all this victorious wording and expectations, then in 3-4 days our tanks will be running along the streets of Kiev. Lukashenko was more inclined to get involved actively in the battle, in the combat field, but something stopped him. And I believe this was the action of the Belarusian opposition. Then there was appeals from Belarusian mothers. There was a wide campaign in the independent media. And so we froze this situation at the very beginning. Although we did not manage to really keep Belarus out of this conflict, as it is quite known to everybody, we consider that the regime of Lukashenko is a co-aggressor. It is proven by numerous international legal norms, the definition of aggression, the definition of co-aggression. It is clear, to my mind, to all civilized nations that the actions of Belarus should be considered as the military crimes, although quite yesterday, Lukashenko's minister, Mackey, was trying to explain at the General Assembly that we do not break any international norm or any international treaty. And he is saying that while between Belarus and Ukraine, there is a treaty on friendship and neighborhood saying explicitly that the territory of both states should not be used for the acts of aggression against each other in any circumstances. I mean, the regime is still pretending, still lying, and still pretending to be out of relevance for the moment. Well, we should be maybe used to that, to those lies and to those cozy attempts to escape the responsibility, but the world, to my mind, is now very determined and strong to say that these are the two aggressors, and the crime of aggression is an international crime that should result into the accountability mechanisms and international tribunals. So basically that's what we should expect. And as for the mobilization, once again, it comes to the lies of both Russia and Belarusian regimes. Today, Lukashenko said that we are not going to mobilize. It's not a question for us. Yesterday, his general said that we have already mobilized, so we don't need any further mobilization. Partial mobilization of Russia, I was amused to watch this morning a very, well, reflectable video of a 63 years old retired colonel from the Russian army who was summoned to the army and who was waiting to be sent to the battlefield with all the promises of first, second, third grade, with all the age limits, with all the promises of partial mobilization. So yes, it's a very difficult period, I would say, for the Russian society, for Belarus, but we should really believe in the future, and we should take into account that in the modern circumstances, in the modern smart war, you don't necessarily have to have millions of people to be successful in the battlefield. But well, we'll see what will happen. Thank you.
And do you know, Ambassador, what are the moods in the Belarusian elite and the army now after this real news about mobilization? Or, because we don't have really information to say what was happening since 24th of February, but do you think this very act might somehow change the moods there?
Well, thanks for the question. We've been receiving this inside information. It's not public. We cannot mention names. We cannot mention ranks. But I mean, we've been in touch with the Belarusian units since February. And it was clear then that the morale of the troops in general is very, very low. They were not ready to be actively engaged. They are not ready to be actively engaged. And they will not be ready to be actively engaged in the front. So the option for them is either to be forced into the battlefield or to find any other ways to withdraw. Well, I was thinking about figures and facts that happens in Russia. It really looks like this campaign was not converted into a patriotic war, because we know about these two previous mobilizations happened during the First World War, during the Second World War. Now the third mobilization in Russia comes in the times when the Russian society rejects to consider this war as the patriotic, as the war that they need to be participating, and they need to defend what? It's still a big question to my mind for many Russians. So the bigger questions for Belarusians arises. What shall we do? Why shall we fight with Ukraine, our neighbor? Why shall we be killing Ukrainians? For what? I mean, there is no motivation. The morale is very, very low. And Lukashenko made this survey, made sort of a classified survey among the troops. And that was one more reason why those troops were not put into action. And I don't think that this situation drastically changed during recent either months or weeks. And our understanding is that the Belarusian troops, with all other characteristics like no absence of combat experience, old equipment, understaffed or whatever, the main idea is the morale of the troops, and the morale is not there. So I hope that we will keep this way, and we'll refrain from putting our compatriots into this aggression.
I know it is really hard to predict the actions of somehow illogical and authoritarian person, but do you think that Lukashenko still hopes he can somehow avoid the responsibility for being a co-aggressor in this war? Or what do you think he still hopes to get out of this war? Maybe he wants to trade on his participation with Putin's regime more?
Well,
just your opinion.
You are right. It's very difficult to predict the actions of the crazy man, and nobody knows what happens in his head. I remember his saying in Russian, вы знаете, что я вам хочу сказать? Откуда вам знать, если я сам не знаю, что я вам хочу сказать? Да? Do you know what I'm going to say to you? How could you know if I don't know myself what I'm going to say? But it's, well, sort of a joke. No, but Lukashenko is ready, and that's what he was doing all the previous, well, 20, 25 years. He was always ready to change sides, and he was always ready to look for the ways to take the side or to take the winning side. So now I may imagine that he is really torn between two extremes. On one side, he doesn't have any other allies than Russia, and he is largely depending on Russia, and he basically became a puppet government under the guidance of Russia, and he cannot say openly that I'm not supporting your actions or your intentions. On the other side, he fully realizes that it's very unlikely that Russia could be victorious in this war, and it's very unlikely that he will gain anything from direct participation in this war, but for problems and challenges back at home. So he's doing his best to stay aside from this scheme, pretending once on the other side to be a very peaceful-minded. And we can watch it in his words as well, that we are not for the war, we are against the war, we are strongly against the war, and he is still repeating that while we have to observe our obligations with our neighbors. Now he is referring already to the mechanism and procedures of the Organization for Collective Security, which theoretically could be involved if Russian territory is under threat. But in this organization, to take any decision means that everybody should be consent with that. And so Lukashenko could simply reject any decision of this organization and still will try to stay aside. So we will be seeing a lot of maneuvering of this illegal dictator, but from the legal point of view, he is already there. I mean, he is already co-aggressor. He has already committed military crimes. He will be held responsible. The only open question is the degree of this responsibility compared to all the atrocities that Russia is doing in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So I will now ask Agnieszka, Professor Legucka, but I call Professor Legucka Agnieszka because we just know each other personally quite well. Do you think that the referenda, which started to take place today in the morning very urgently, in an urgent manner in Kherson and in the Zaporizhzhia regions, do you think they will change somehow their situation inside Russia? I'm speaking about the moods, or why do you think the regime is doing this, and do you think they will be successful by these actions? Because of course you also probably can say how much Ukrainian population is really involved in this and what is happening there. Maybe you can comment a little bit on that. before we get to our most, I think, most sensitive to all of us topic, whether this aggression will finally actually stretch to our region, right, to Poland, to the Baltic states. Should we be afraid that this might be the second step after the mobilization, aggression here?
Yeah, we need to underline that this so-called referendum are totally fake referendums, because one example, the urny, polling boxes are located in Moscow. 15 boxes, at least today's 15 boxes of to voting are located today in Moscow. So you can understand that they are not referendums at all. At least in Crimea in 2014, there were also fakes referendum, but at least they were more prepared and they were trying to pretend to the whole world that citizens there, they were pro-Russians and they were trying to legitimize somehow that they had right to have Crimea. But this time they are more chaotic, they're working under the pressure because since at least April, we knew that those referendums will take place, right? Sergei Lavrov, he was saying that people there will have such a referendum, but something has happened. Ukrainians conquered territories, and this is what we are observing now. Mobilization and referendums striked Putin himself that Ukrainians can win the war. And what we are observing right now is a situation that shocked Russian authorities. They are under the big pressure. So what they are doing right now is something that they were preparing for at least 4 of November, but they are fasted the process. And they are trying to somehow prevent Ukrainian offensive, counteroffensive actually, over those territories to the south. And we know in Poland, and especially in Ukraine, that this will not stop counteroffensive, because Ukrainians know Russians quite well from some time, at least from 2014, how they are signaling, strategic signaling. But what Kremlin is doing, it's from Kremlin perspective, it's trying to shock the West. Maybe not United States, but also maybe the United States elite, Republicans or Democrats, that they will try to limit the Western military support to Ukraine, or to force Western diplomats, and especially in Europe, to limit military support to Ukraine, somehow pressure them not to support Ukraine, or pressure them to make some ceasefire, peace over Ukraine, that those territories will be Russians. So if Ukraine will make counteroffensive over those territories, this will be Russia. So Russia will have a right to use nuclear power. That's simple, quite. It's quite clear for Kremlin, it's quite clear for Ukraine. It's not so clear in in the United States, in Germany, it's not so clear in France, it's definitely not clear in Italy that Russia And this is the big question, if Putin is bluffing or not bluffing, because he's really desperate over the Ukraine. He's desperate to win this war, to preserve his power. So what the West should do? Because now what it is academic, maybe not so academic, but definitely about the strategic signaling, right? Now Russia, what it's doing, it's strategic signaling. Yes, we will use nuclear weapon in case Ukraine will attack our territory, because those territories will be ours, right? Because we know that these pseudo-referendums will have like 99% of those citizens will support those. We know how it works, right? Since Lenin counting votes, right? What will next do? And now Americans are doing right things. So Ben Hodges, a few days ago, he said rightly that if you will do that, we will do that. So he's not the guy who he is now not the leader, but he's now also signaling, making a strategic signaling. So if you will attack Ukraine, because still as the West we know that still those territories will be Ukrainians, we will destroy your Baltic fleet and it will be destroyed.
Maybe you need to say who is General Ben Hodges, because maybe not everybody knows who he is.
Yeah, he was the former general of the NATO's forces in Europe.
And do you think the NATO is really prepared for this kind of nuclear strike or any other aggressive actions? Do you think they're seriously taking this threat from Russia?
What I know, NATO is making scenarios for Russian actions with the nuclear tactic attack in Ukraine. Because, of course, what Russia will do, the most probable scenario, I mean, because we know that Russia, the scenarios how Russia will act against NATO is already prepared, right? So how Russia will act nowadays, according to this war, there are scenarios that Russia probably will act with tactical weapon in Ukraine. So there are scenarios how the NATO will respond to that.
Do you agree, Anastasiia, that Putin actually can do this? And do people in Russia believe in this, and are they prepared for a nuclear war, you think?
I will continue from the same words, that it's very difficult to understand what is in mind of crazy person, and it's rather the question to psychiatrists, but psychiatrists should first review the person in person and then can answer. So unfortunately, I believe we will never have any relevant information and couldn't do any prognosis, realistic prognosis about what really would he do or would he decide to do one day and one moment. By now we saw that he used all this rhetoric, first of all, to keep somehow his interests, and to prolong the war as it is. So this is his, I believe, long-term strategy, because in this situation he first understands that he can't come back to Russia without victory. Even more, he understands that further attacks of Ukraine, successful attacks from Ukraine, is really dangerous for his legitimacy inside Russia. So that's why he wants these referendums now. That's why, as Agnieszka has told, he wants to show the new border and to try to trade new rules and new conditions of further war. At the same situation, I believe that he has a very he has two different signals from inside Russia. From one side, we saw before the mobilization call, we saw that part of elites, and there were governors, but these governors represented some of beneficiaries of this regime. They announced self-mobilization, and it means for me that they see themselves as beneficiaries. First of all, they see themselves in this war as new. They saw that the war is a new oil. We joked that people is a new oil for Putin and his team a couple of years ago, when the prices were not so competitive for them, when they stopped being taking money only from gas and oil, and they started another repressive cycle, not only against civil society, but also against entrepreneurship, against IT sector, and so on. So now we saw that for these people, war is new oil. They could have business on this war, and of course they would support any continuation of this war. And at the same time, these people, I believe, do not want to become dead people in the nuclear war. So that's why in this dilemma, Putin himself has to keep nuclear bomb as long as he can in the hands, but not sending it to somewhere. And the same also with some kind of borderlines which are shown to him from NATO, from the European states, from the United States. Again, he doesn't want additional escalation from some other sides, from Ukraine, from Europe. But he wants to keep staying where he is and keep some confidence in his legitimization inside Russia if he is not losing this war.
Do you think, because there are also such rumors and many people are concerned with that in Belarus, that if there is a real failure in Ukraine, somehow Putin will be interested in refocusing on Belarus? Do you think there is an interest in that? And my also another question to you would be, what do you think awaits? I know it's very hard to say. We still see that events keep going on and unfolding in very spectacular ways. But what awaits Russia at the end of this war?
About the Belarus, again, the rationalism in their mind still exists. So if they do not need taking Belarus officially under the Russian protection or as Russian territory, they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't spend resources on this thing. Until they have loyal Lukashenko and can't do this, it's okay. I don't think actually that Russian people's mood would change from the information that Putin and Lukashenko make a deal and Belarus now is a region of Russia. So I don't think this is profitable for Kremlin, for Putin personally, to do something in this way. But again, we see the situation today, we don't see the situation tomorrow, everything could change. As for Russians after this war, it's really, again, it's very difficult to predict, but If we see from today, for example, if Putin and, I don't know, so Kremlin would be bombed suddenly, yes, and the war is finished and everything, the peace is coming, yeah. I don't believe Russia would have a better future because in this case we would see, we could have only one scenario that Russian authorities, new Russian authorities would be nominated by Europeans, by Ukrainians. They probably would give this nomination to some of older leaders like Kasparov, Khodorkovsky, or somebody else. And then we would see that these leaders would come and would wait until democracy would be built, as they have told. So I don't think there is a good scenario for Russia. Also, I don't think there is a good scenario for Russia if Ukrainian army come to Moscow one day and try to build a new state on base of Russian Federation, current Russian Federation in this territory. Again, because there would be no Russian citizens would not be building this state. It would be built by somebody for them, and again, they would be some objects. They would have this self-objectivization, how I explain these moods today, of moods of escapism and trying not to participate in anything, in any political. So, in my opinion, what we have to do and what we need to do, anyhow, anyhow, what Putin does, or anyhow, what anybody else does, we need to build our civil society. We have to make this civil society be a subject of future Russian changes. And in this case, only in this case, we could have some chance for better lives. I hope European countries and European potential partners in Europe could understand these needs. Because now I see rather they prefer to wait that Russians somehow by themselves defeat Putin, or Ukrainians would defeat Putin, or somebody else would defeat Putin. They could help, they could assist to Ukrainians, but they do not see strategically about what to do with Russia after this war. And in my opinion, this is a point which should be discussed. In at least, not publicly, at least by some conversations, at least by some consultations with experts, with civil society, with different sectors in Europe. And that's probably could change the situation in future. This is the future for Russia.
Thank you, Ambassador. Do you think that looking at what is happening, there is a chance that at some point Belarusian elite, I mean the current one which is surrounding the Belarusian official authorities, can rebel against what is happening? Or do you think that they will stay loyal to the regime until the very end of the war? Do you think they are more passive, or there is a chance they will become active and they will become somehow more prone to actually maybe be allies of the Belarusian democratic opposition?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. Well, it will be difficult for me to answer that, but maybe I will make a reference to your previous question and on the intentions of Putin. I even looked up a word in the dictionary. At a certain moment, Belarus could be like a prey in the hunter's hands, in the Putin's hands. Because if he wants to project himself as the emperor, as the conqueror, as the whatever collector of the lands, he will need at certain moment something to produce, to show to the Russian public, and we now see that he's having great difficulties in Ukraine. And well, we shall not exclude that at a certain moment he will decide that, well, if not Ukraine, then why not Belarus? And definitely it's difficult to know what will happen tomorrow, but we know what happened yesterday. And here I refer to the article of Putin in the Russian press devoted to Ukraine. It was all devoted, big article devoted to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian statehood, to the right, or not right rather, of the Ukraine to appear on the political map. But critical reading of this article would tell you that it was addressed to Belarus as well. But because all the arguments that were used against Ukraine could be presented against Belarus, and we feel it. And that's why the opposition now, to my mind, quite with arguments claiming that the sovereignty and independence of Belarus is under great threat. And we have already the examples of that, like moving the troops into the territory, like using this territory against the neighboring state. It means that Lukashenko has already yielded some of the sovereign powers that he has to have, the parliament has to have. He yielded these powers to Kremlin, and Kremlin already got some part, at least part of the sovereignty of Belarus in their hands. Now we come to Belarusian elite. So for them, it's a trajectory that could finally lead to the status when they are not elite any longer, or not Belarusian elite, or not regional elite, because this perspective of losing the statehood basically is a perspective that would bring to the end all the aspirations of those who are now serving for Lukashenko. And we're already observing the split in this elite, and we're already having very good signals, I would say, of, well, those who want to keep Belarus independent, and those who don't want to have foreign troops or foreign power on the territory of Belarus. And we expect that with the outside pressure and outside procedures that we can specifically develop for this category of civil servants, we will be able to really split this elite and to have the most conscious part of the Belarusian elite switching sides and coming to the side of the people. Although we realize fully that for the moment it's rather difficult to expect that any person could go publicly and say something against the current regime, or could freely refer to democratic channels or mass media, because it immediately leads to the very negative consequences. But this work is done underground. It's difficult to say now, but I have a feeling at least that the more Ukraine will be successful on the fronts, the better Belarusian elite will be prepared to consider different options for the future.
Thank you. The audience will be collecting questions soon, so if you have any, please get ready. I have another question for Ambassador. Do you, not you only, but just the democratic opposition movement, are there concrete plans depending on different scenarios of this war, what you will do? Because we know that there have been previously issues with Ukraine, of Zelensky not meeting Tikhanovskaya, of then Ukrainians blaming Belarusians for the involvement of the war. Do you think that what should be the plan to rebuild this partnership and this mutual trust with this country, with our important neighbor?
Well, as everybody knows, we've been fighting already for more than 2 years. There were different periods in this fight. We've been trying different things, trying to find peaceful solution to the political crisis inside Belarus. You know about these initiatives of negotiations, intergovernmental conferences, mediation, dialogue, national dialogue. I mean, I can name them in a very long row. But to my mind, the answer to your question is in the decision which I already mentioned at the beginning of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, whom we consider to be a democratically elected leader, because you know this argument Tikhanovskaya is saying that we have no 100% proof of our victory during this election, but we are confident that Lukashenko lost, and to my mind every normal person would agree with that. So that was her decision to set up this united transitional cabinet, and not long ago, 2 days ago, the cabinet took another decision and instructed all its representatives to come up with specific plans on different areas. It is the plan Peramoga developed by Paul. It's the plan of supporting Belarusian volunteers that are fighting on the Ukrainian side. It's a plan to raise up the awareness and support from the international community. It's a plan to ensure the transfer of power in Belarus, and all this done just for one basically thing, because we believe that Lukashenko lost his right to represent the people of Belarus, formally represent, inside Belarus and outside of Belarus. And but he's pretending to do so. He's pretending to speak on behalf of the Belarusians. He's pretending to take any decision on behalf of the Belarusians. With this cabinet, Belarusians would have an alternative. They will have an alternative system of power that pretends to represent their national interests, pretends to have its own agenda, and one of the first steps of the cabinet was to support the Ukraine, to demand the withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory of Belarus, to firmly stand for the sovereignty and independence of Belarus. And I believe with this agenda, the further actions of the cabinet would be warmly received by the Belarusians and by the international community. And with building up of the potential of this cabinet, we will have a very good alternative to the illegitimate regime which is now running our country.
Yes, this is so wonderful, but you don't have yet any concrete steps in mind how to reapproach relations with Ukraine.
No, it's in the plans. I mean, it's unlikely that we would discuss this in details now. I mentioned already this decision of the cabinet, which is a crucial decision, and they expect, it was published, and they expect that by the 5th of October, all representatives should come up with specific plans, including the plans for developing, once again, connections with the international community, and of course Ukraine in this context for us would be a very crucial partner, and we are confident that without a democratic Ukraine we will never build, well it will be rather difficult to build an independent Belarus, but with the independent Ukraine our chances to preserve the independence and to build a democratic Belarus are much higher. So we believe that we have strategic common goals, we have strategic common allies, basically we have strategic common enemy, and there are many things that could be used to consolidate our efforts, and definitely we will be going along this path.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Do we have questions in the audience? Because if we don't, I have other questions. Yes, please. Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sarah. I have a question to Anastasiia. Do you think Alexei Navalny could be a leader for Russia in future? Thank you.
If you are asking me personally, I believe Russian Federation should, the territory of Russian Federation should be completely revised as a country, as a state. And I hope we will sustain at least the real federal state with parliamentary system and without monopolization of power in Moscow. In this sense, I hope we would have no president at all, because any president showed it's logic of the system. Yes, if you have very different parts of very big country with very different landscape, political, social landscape in these regions, then you can't make it manageable from one center. If you start managing it from one center, from the capital, you would have the empire. In this sense, I hope personally to have completely other system with strong municipal authorities, with strong and independent regional authorities, regional level, and with such a least and small numbers of federal functions which are necessary only in this subsidiary system, but not to have some kind of centralized state like it is now. As for others, as for opinions of different parts of the Russian activists, Russian civil society, Russian political activists, of course there are different options. Of course there are a lot of supporters of Alexei Navalny personally, and they of course believe that he would be the best president for future Russia. But also we have others who believe that Yavlinsky could be the best president for Russia, or I don't know, Zyuganov could be the best president for Russia. So I hope we could sustain such a system. No, please. I hope we'll be able to sustain a common tribunal between Ukrainian, Russian, Free Russian and Belarus side, specifically to decide what specific war crimes and just political crimes these people, two people and their adherents and their teams did. And I believe now, after the last events in Russia, I think that for Putin there is another crime he should be prosecuted in future. Because now after this mass mobilization, he first declared the readiness to a very bloody war in Ukraine, and he would really be responsible for genocide not only Ukrainians but also Russians. Sorry, it's the addition about Lukashenko.
I think there are more questions, right? Please come here and introduce yourself also. Yes, you're here, and please introduce yourself so that we know with whom I'm talking.
Thank you for a really interesting discussion. Name is Philip Bekanov, independent sociologist. The question would probably be directed to Ambassador, I guess. So there are two, competing assessments, let's call it this way, about Lukashenko and his control over the Belarusian troops. So one of those is something that I hear a lot from my Ukrainian friends and colleagues, that Lukashenko is somehow obstructing the Russians, and he somehow struggles with Putin's pressure to invade, to utilize Belarusian army. The other assessment, of course, is that, well, it's not like that. It's just Russians never pressured enough, actually, and Putin never gave the command to, utilize the army. I'm asking you more as the representative of the National Anti-Crisis Management Team, which has some access and communication with the people from the inside. What is your assessment about that?
Thank you. Well, now it's easier to speculate. I believe that both approaches could be right. We cannot say that Lukashenko completely lost the control over the troops, and because he has been building this vertical system of power with the negative selection for at least 20 years, and now, yes, he has this system, and it's clear that if he gives the order, this order would come down to every either regiment or battalion or district of Belarus, and that's what he's doing basically with the troops, keeping them on maneuvers since May. So every week, every 2 weeks, he would announce another type of maneuvers, and all the troops are digging the trenches, crossing the rivers, whatever, pretending to do preparation for the military task. And well, that's one side of the story. And definitely Lukashenko doesn't want them to be involved in the combat, once again, due mainly to the effect of this very low morale, which is important for any combat unit to be involved in the because, well, there are many stories, personal stories, maybe it would be characteristic to mention that, say, most of the citizens of Belarus from the southern parts of Belarus, like Gomel, like Brest, to a certain extent Mogilov, have a lot of relatives on the Ukrainian part. They've been communicating, they've been cooperating, they've been moving to each other just a few months ago, and now they're having the machine gun and receiving the order to go over the river and to kill those who are staying on the other side. So the morale of the troops is really low, and Lukashenko is really afraid to give such an order to them, because at the same time he is running the risk that at a certain moment those troops could choose rather Minsk than Kiev, and could go to Minsk and to help us to ensure the transfer of power. On the other hand, yes, I may imagine that Putin would like to have as many allies as possible, and he is still pretending to call his military forces like allied forces, союзные войска, if you heard this in the Russian. By allied forces, they mean that the Russian army is fighting together with the army of Donetsk and Lugansk. So if Belarus, for example, would join these allied forces, they would be more than happy. But here you could have another difficulty, because if you are really a combat chief and you have an option to have a unit that could surrender next day, or could leave its position and to go somewhere to the other side, or could refrain of doing something that you expect them to do you need such a unit on your battlefield? You need to be 100% sure that this unit would be subordinated, would be disciplined, would be really engaged actively in the combat. I may imagine that Russian commanders have these difficulties with their own Russian troops, but they realize that they would have much more difficulties with the Belarusians. It's not the difference of language, but once again, it's a difference of my mentality that should be kept in mind. And so that was one of the refrains as well, not to have Belarusian troops in the combat, but I would make my final point. If it would be needed for Putin, if it would be deadly needed for Putin, if he wants to open up a northern front and with 1 million of mobilized new soldiers, I may imagine that could be a scenario that these 300 or 500,000 would move into Belarus and then would start moving from the north once again to Kiev. And if this would be needed, Putin is really able to give an order, and Lukashenko will not escape.
Thank you very much. We have 7 more minutes, and there are 1 more question so far. Thank you, Christopher.
Yes, thank you very much. Christopher Forst for the Ebert Foundation, maybe also to the ambassador mostly.
Don't forget about the ladies. They're good experts.
They can feel free to answer as well, but it's about a Belarusian perspective. So I think we all agree that there is a mood against being part of the war in Belarus, as you have all described. but at the same time there is still quite a group of society that watches Russian state media, that follows Russian narrative to some extent. Do you think that the current mobilization in Russia actually might lead to some shifts in the mood of this part of society in the short term? I think that's something that's not really yet so much discussed, but it has some impact on Belarus. I mean, there's many Belarusians that have family in Russia. There's even some Belarusians with Russian passports. You see more Russians now coming to Belarus these days. No flights from Minsk anymore. So that you can still book. So do you think this has a short-term effect also on this part of society that follows Russian state media and that narrative to some extent? And is that also part of your strategy short-term that this kind of slight shift in the public mood may appear?
Okay, thank you. I may be not very much correct in the figures, but I will make a reference to the different social surveys that have been made with the Belarusian society under the conditions that we have for the moment. At least Chatham House, as you may know, discovered that something like 85% of Belarusians are completely against participation of Belarusian troops in the war against Ukraine. It means that this 85% represent both opponents of Lukashenko, which are the majority, and those who are in favor of Lukashenko, Yabatsky. So they are against the war as well. Although you quite correctly mentioned that with Russian TV and propaganda, a rather high number of Belarusians, like 30–35%, would not oppose actions of Russian Federation. So they let Russia go, let's say. They are not opposing that Russia would do something on the Ukrainian front, which to me looks like a big number. But here I believe that this number will be diminishing with the mobilization. And because, yes, you have personal contacts, you have different scale, because with the Russian propaganda, everything was kept really quiet. No casualties, we are going forward, Nazis in the Ukraine are losing, and so we are going to win tomorrow. And now you have 300,000 or 1 million mobilization in Russia for what? And that's once again an eye-opening event to my mind, to Belarusians. This morning I heard already, well, saw basically a very good post in the Telegram channels, new service. I would explain to any Russian citizen how to hide in Belarus for 1 week or for 5 to 6 years. So they are inviting already Russians for the escape in Belarus. Although you may also know that as soon as we have this influx of Russians to Belarus, and well, planes or aircrafts, it's one thing, but you know that there are no formal border on the roads, and I mean, what would happen with the cars and buses, nobody would be really able to calculate, but our militia got immediately orders from Lukashenko to trace all Russian license plates, to trace all hostels, hotels, apartments, and to be aware where new Russians are. They are not new Russians with the big money, but I imagine those new Russians that unfortunately could be found and returned back if necessary. So, I mean, Belarusian society is really very open and exposed to all these processes that are happening in Russia. But I believe that with this type of mobilization, we will have better figures, much better figures concerning the potential participation of Belarus in this war, and I hope this figure will be close to 100%. And we will have much less figure of those who would support or would not oppose Russian actions in Ukraine.
Thank you, Ambassador. Do we have any other questions? Because if not, I will give also floor for Professor Legucka.
Just one comment to this crimes of Putin, or trial over the Lukashenko and Putin. I think that not only them should be trialed, because there were, and something that astonished me always, that army in Russian society is always one of the trusted institution. And I think that it is, one of the reasons is that there were no war crimes trial. And Russia had war in Chechnya, never trialed. In Syria, we always forgot it somehow because it was far away. Georgia, and now we have Ukraine, Bucha, Irpin, and massacre there. So we have to do everything what we can to stop that, because winners, you know, will try to rewrite the history, and no one blames and makes or try to not to be trialed, not only the leaders but also, you know, commanders and etc. and different lower levels. That's only one comment.
I just would like to add also that me and my colleagues who we discussed this with, we believe that we have to try all our best to make Putin and others to come to this, to live until this tribunal is possible. And also we believe that we should keep human rights principles and make this tribunal a really independent and open process, and discuss not only war crimes but also the internal crimes. First of all, the usurpation of power and violently taking it and keeping the power in Russia, because we can see all the instruments of this process, including political murders, including falsification of elections, including making people fear to tell about their opinions, and censorship in media and everything else. And also, at the same time, I believe that we should still be very strictly, we should follow in very strictly human rights principles. And as I wrote today in the morning, for example, in comments, if, for example, Vladimir Putin one day come to Russian-Finnish border and ask for asylum, we should accept his application. And then his case should be also treated as others' cases, but also at the same, his case should be treated in tribunal also. And this would be the right way to go, yes, without any emotions or other discrimination options, which is really many people and me personally would do, but we should step back and think calmly about this. I tell an ultimate thing about Putin, but if, for example, some of the people from military units or from government of Russian Federation decide to change side, we should make this opportunity, but we should admire their participation in war crimes, their participation in political crimes in Russia, and decide how to do and work with them according with all this information.
We have, I think, one last question. Please introduce yourself. Please come here. Introduce yourself. It's not probably working, right? not working. Sorry, can you say the same again?
Okay, my name is Marina Vorbey. It's the platform for Unation and Self-Organization Free Union online. And the question is, how do you think it is possible to involve people from Belarus who don't support Russia and support democratic changes in Belarus, to involve them in democratic movement in such a situation?
Here you go, Ambassador.
Do you have a plan?
I wish you could answer this question. That's your cup of tea. But of course, well, we know that there is a big potential in the Belarusian society, bearing in mind this very high figure of those who are against the war, bearing the very high figure of those who were against the Lukashenko, who would be ready to support real democratic changes. Well, unfortunately, we state that repressions, the level of the repressions is so high that you could hardly expect any public demonstration of regular, normal civil life. As you may know, all independent medias are closed. More than 700 non-governmental organizations are liquidated. Many activists are jailed. And I can go on, unfortunately, with this list. But we have plans. Once again, we have a plan, Peramoga, which is run by Paul, and they claim that they have already more than 200,000 of volunteers already inscripted, involved in the potential realization of this plan, waiting for a signal. So, I mean, waiting for the right time to receive this signal and to come back to the streets, to come back to the different establishments and to reinsert peacefully once again. That's once again one of the peaceful means to reinsert peacefully what we demanded and what we expect, and to ensure this transfer of power and free and fair elections. There are other forms, different forms of protest activity which is not disappearing. I wouldn't mention partisan movement. There are independent press, underground press. There are different associations of courtyards, let's say, in Belarus. There are Рабочий рух for trade unions, and well, maybe you know better. So we believe and we are sure that the level of protest in Belarus has not disappeared. It has maintained basically on the same level, and we believe that there is a big potential for all those protest activities to be manifested and to be finally realized in practical terms. With this positive message, I would encourage you for further actions in this field.
Thank you very much. And if we have no more questions, we don't want to hold you from your coffee break anymore. So thank you very much, the audience, first of all, for being great listeners, for your questions. Let's give a great, huge round of applause for Professor Agnieszka Legucka. Anastasiia Sergeeva from What Foundation. And Ambassador Vladzimir Astapenka from not only National Anti-Crisis Management, but also Deputy Representative for Foreign Affairs of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus. Now I had an opportunity to present everybody one more time.